The snow had turned his clothes into a coffin of ice. When Eliza Hartley found him collapsed outside her trading post that brutal Montana morning, she thought she was dragging a corpse through her door. But corpses don't bleed. And corpses don't whisper names of the dead in their frozen sleep. What happened next would shake her to her very core. Because sometimes, when you try to save a dying man, you discover that death might have been the merciful option. And sometimes, the most dangerous men are the ones who have nothing left to lose but everything to protect. Before we dive into the story, if you love tales of redemption and second chances in the unforgiving frontier, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another heart-wrenching story. And hey, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love knowing that people from all corners of the world are gathering here to share these incredible moments. Now let's continue with the story. The blizzard had been howling for 3 days straight when Eliza heard the thud against her door. Living alone at the remote trading post since her husband's death 8 months ago, she'd grown accustomed to the wind playing tricks. But this sound was different. Heavy. Final. Like something had given up its fight against the storm right there on her doorstep. She pulled her shawl tight and cracked open the door. The wind nearly tore it from her hands, but not before she saw him. A mountain of a man, face down in the snow, ice crystals already forming a death mask across his bearded face. His massive frame blocked her entire doorway, and for a moment, she considered leaving him there. Mountain men died in these territories all the time. But then she saw the blood, fresh red against pristine white, seeping from somewhere beneath those frozen furs. Eliza had been a doctor's wife for 6 years. She'd assisted in enough procedures to know that blood meant life still fighting to hang on. Hooking her hands under his arms, she pulled with everything she had. The man had to weigh close to 250 pounds, his clothes heavy with ice adding another 50. She dragged him inch by inch into her cabin, her boots slipping on the floor now slick with melting snow. Once inside, she reached for his coat, trying to find the source of the bleeding. But the leather and fur had frozen solid, like armor welded to his body. She grabbed her skinning knife and began cutting, careful but urgent. The blade struggled through the iced fabric, and as she peeled back the first layer, the man's eyes shot open. Blue, impossibly blue, like the deep ice of a glacier, and filled with absolute terror. His hand shot up, gripping her wrist with shocking strength for someone half dead. But it wasn't violence in his touch. It was desperation. His lips moved, trying to form words through the frost. "Please," he managed, his voice raw as torn leather. "Don't." But Eliza had already seen what he was trying to hide. As the coat fell away, his shirt beneath was in tatters, and through those tears, she could see his torso. Scars covered almost every inch of visible skin. But these weren't the clean scars of battle or the rough marks of frontier life. These were deliberate, methodical. Someone had taken their time with him. And there, carved into his chest in letters that had healed badly, still red and infected, was a single word: murderer. The man's grip on her wrist loosened as his eyes rolled back. He'd used his last strength, trying to stop her from seeing. Eliza stood frozen for a moment, not from cold, but from recognition. She knew those eyes. She'd seen them in wanted posters that had circulated through the territory 6 months ago. Jonas Reed, the mountain man accused of slaughtering the entire Garrett family. 3 children, including a baby. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle mounted above her fireplace. But then she looked again at those wounds, at the careful cruelty written across his body. Whoever had done this had taken weeks, maybe months. This wasn't justice. This was torture. And those wounds were infected. Without treatment, he'd be dead by morning. She had a choice to make. Let a possible child killer die on her floor, or save him and risk everything. Eliza looked at his unconscious form, at the blood now pooling beneath him. Then she did what her husband would have done. She chose life. Rolling up her sleeves, she began to work. The fever took him to dark places. Jonas Reed thrashed on Eliza's kitchen table, fighting enemies only he could see. His massive hands grabbed at invisible throats while names spilled from his cracked lips. Not curses or threats, but apologies. Sarah Garrett, little Tommy, baby Rose. The family he was supposed to have killed, but here he was, begging their forgiveness in his delirium. Eliza worked through the night, cleaning wounds that should have killed him weeks ago. Each infected gash told its own story of calculated cruelty. Whoever had done this hadn't wanted him dead. They'd wanted him to suffer. The word carved into his chest had been done slowly. She could tell by the jagged edges where he'd struggled against his bonds. But it was the other wounds that made her hands shake. Burn marks in perfect circles, cuts that followed nerve lines. Someone with medical knowledge had done this. Someone who knew exactly how to cause maximum pain without killing. When she tried to clean the deepest wound on his shoulder, Jonas's hand shot out, catching her throat. His eyes opened, wild and unfocused, seeing not her but someone else. His grip was weak though, the fever stealing his mountain man strength. She didn't pull away. Instead, she placed her free hand gently over his. "It's all right," she whispered. "You're safe. No one's going to hurt you anymore." Something in her voice must have reached him through the madness. His hand fell away, and tears began rolling down his weathered cheeks. This giant of a man, who'd survived torture that would have killed most people 3 times over, was crying like a child. "I tried to save them," he mumbled, his voice breaking. "Heard the screams. Got there too late. Sarah was already gone. The children." His body convulsed with a sob. "I held baby Rose as she died. Tried to stop the bleeding, but there was so much. So much blood." Eliza's hands stilled on his wounds. This wasn't the confession of a killer. This was the anguish of a witness. A man who'd failed to prevent a tragedy and been blamed for it. She worked in silence after that, letting him ramble through his fever dreams. Piece by piece, the story emerged. How he'd been tracking elk when he heard the gunshots. How he'd run toward the Garrett homestead, finding the family slaughtered. How men had found him there, kneeling beside the bodies, covered in their blood from trying to help. They hadn't asked questions, hadn't wanted to hear his explanation. They'd just seen what they wanted to see. The torture had lasted 2 months. They'd kept him in an abandoned mine shaft, taking turns with their cruelty. The leader, someone Jonas called Brennan in his delirium, had been the worst. He'd wanted Jonas to confess, to admit to murders he didn't commit. But Jonas had refused, even when they started carving their verdict into his skin. By dawn, the fever had broken. Jonas woke to find Eliza asleep in a chair beside the table, her hand resting on his arm. The gentle weight of it was foreign to him. How long since anyone had touched him without intent to harm? A year? More? Even before the torture, he'd lived alone in the mountains, trading pelts and keeping to himself. He tried to sit up, sending fire through every wound. The small gasp of pain woke Eliza instantly. She was on her feet, hands checking his temperature, his bandages, with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this countless times before. "Don't move," she ordered. "You'll tear the stitches." "Why?" His voice was rough as bark. "Why help me? You know who I am. What they say I did." Eliza met his eyes steadily. "I know what torture looks like. My husband was a doctor. We treated men who'd been held by hostile tribes, by bandits. None of them looked like you. What was done to you was personal, deliberate. Someone wanted you to suffer, and they wanted everyone to know why. But here's what I learned from my husband. Guilty men break under torture. They confess to stop the pain. You never did you?" Jonas turned his face away. "How do you know?" "Because you're still alive. They wouldn't have let you go if you'd confessed. You escaped, didn't you? That's why you were out in that blizzard with wounds that should have killed you. You've been running, hiding, trying to survive long enough to what? Clear your name. To find proof," he whispered. "I know who really killed them. But nobody will believe a mountain man over a respected sheriff." Eliza's blood went cold. "Sheriff Brennan?" Jonas's eyes snapped to hers, sharp despite his weakness. "You know him?" She nodded slowly. "He's the one who told me my husband was killed by bandits." But William was writing to the territorial judge with some kind of evidence about illegal land claims. His body was never found. They stared at each other, 2 damaged souls recognizing a shared enemy. And in that moment, something shifted between them. They weren't strangers anymore. They were allies. The truth came out slowly, like pus from an infected wound. Over the next 3 days, as Jonas grew stronger under Eliza's care, he told her everything. The Real killers were Brennan's men, claimed jumpers who wanted the Garrett homestead for its water rights. Jonas had stumbled onto the massacre while tracking an elk herd. He'd seen 3 men leaving the scene, recognized one as Brennan's deputy, Marcus Cole. But by the time he'd reached the family, trying desperately to save anyone still breathing, Brennan himself had arrived with a posse. The setup had been perfect. A lone mountain man, known for keeping to himself, covered in blood and kneeling over the bodies. Brennan had played the righteous lawman beautifully, letting the town's grief and rage do most of his work for him. The torture hadn't been about confession. It had been about making sure Jonas looked guilty enough that no one would question the story. "There's proof," Jonas said, his voice stronger now though moving still sent lightning through his healing wounds. "I buried it before they caught me." Sarah Garrett kept a journal. She wrote about Brennan pressuring them to sell, about threats made against her children. And there's more. Maps showing which families would be targeted next. Documents with Brennan's seal. Eliza was cleaning his bandages, her hands steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Where? Devil's Canyon, about 15 miles north. Hidden in an old trapper's cache I used years ago. But Eliza? He caught her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "If I go for it, they'll follow. They've been hunting me since I escaped. I've seen their tracks, even in this blizzard. They know I'm somewhere in this area." She understood what he wasn't saying. His presence here put her in mortal danger. But something else was growing between them, something neither had expected. It had started with her tending his wounds, but it had become more. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. The way her heart raced when their hands accidentally touched. 2 broken people finding something worth protecting in each other. "You're not strong enough to travel yet," she said, trying to keep her voice clinical. "Those wounds need at least another week." "I don't have a week." "You don't have a week. Every day I stay here increases the chance they'll find me." "Find you?" His jaw clenched. "I won't let what happened to the Garretts happen to you." Eliza stood abruptly, walking to the window. The snow had finally stopped, leaving the world pristine and deceptively peaceful. "My husband thought he was protecting me too. Kept his investigation secret, didn't want me involved. Look how that ended." She turned back to him. "We're already in this together, Jonas. The moment I saved your life, I became a target. So we might as well see it through." That evening, as she prepared their simple meal of venison stew and cornbread, Eliza made a decision. She pulled out her husband's journal, the one she'd kept hidden since his death. William had been meticulous, documenting every suspicious land transfer, every family that had suddenly decided to sell and move on. The pattern was clear. Brennan was systematically taking control of all the water rights in the valley. "Your husband was a brave man," Jonas said, reading over her shoulder. She could feel the heat of him, even from inches away. Despite his ordeal, or perhaps because of it, his presence filled the small cabin. Not threatening, but protective, like a wall between her and the harsh world outside. "He was a fool," she said, but there was love in her voice. "He thought the law would protect us. That evidence and truth would be enough." She looked up at Jonas. "You know better, don't you? Men like Brennan don't lose in court. They win with bullets." Jonas nodded slowly. "That's why I never planned to take this to trial. I was going to send the evidence to the federal marshals, let them handle it. But first, I wanted something else." His blue eyes darkened. "I wanted to look Brennan in the eye when he realized he'd failed, that I'd survived everything he'd done, and I was going to bring him down." "Revenge," Eliza said softly. "Justice," Jonas corrected. "For the Garretts. For your husband. For everyone he's destroyed." She reached out, her fingers tracing one of the scars on his forearm. "And what about after? When Brennan's gone, and the truth is known? What then?" Jonas read. He caught her hand, holding it against his scarred skin. "I haven't thought that far ahead. Haven't dared to hope for an after." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Until now." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. But then they heard it. Horses. Multiple riders approaching through the snow. Jonas was on his feet instantly, ignoring the pain that movement caused. Eliza grabbed her rifle, checking the load. They'd run out of time. Brennan's men had found them. The riders stopped just outside the circle of light from Eliza's windows. 5 men, maybe 6. Jonas could tell by the way their horses shifted in the snow. He was already moving, his body protesting every step as he headed for the root cellar. But Eliza grabbed his arm, shaking her head. "If they search and find you hiding, we're both dead," she whispered. "Get in the bed. You're my patient, a traveler who got caught in the storm. You're burning with fever, delirious. Can you do that?" Jonas understood immediately. A sick man wasn't a threat. A hidden man was proof of guilt. He stumbled toward her bedroom, letting his genuine pain show in his movements. Eliza quickly grabbed medical supplies, scattering them strategically. She pulled off his shirt, revealing the bandages, then draped a blanket loosely over him. The carved word on his chest was hidden, but the edges of other wounds were visible. She mussed his hair, splashed water on his face to mimic fever sweats. The knock came hard and demanding. Eliza took a breath, steadying herself. She'd been a frontier wife for years. She knew how to handle rough men. "Coming," she called, adding the right amount of irritation to her voice. She opened the door to find Deputy Marcus Cole and 4 others, all armed, all scanning her cabin with predatory eyes. "Evening, Mrs. Hartley," Cole said, though his tone suggested anything but politeness. "Sorry to disturb you, but we're tracking a dangerous fugitive. Mountain man, about 6'3", heavy build. Killed a family few months back." "I've heard the stories," Eliza said, keeping her voice steady. "Haven't seen anyone like that. Been tending to a sick traveler past 3 days, but he's half dead with fever. Certainly no mountain man." Cole pushed past her without invitation, his men following. "We'll have a look anyway." They searched methodically, checking her storage, looking for signs of hidden weapons or supplies. When Cole reached the bedroom door, Eliza stepped in front of him. "Please, he's very ill. Lung fever. Could be contagious." That gave Cole pause. Disease was more feared than bullets out here. But suspicion won over caution. He pushed open the door. Jonas lay there, eyes closed, mumbling incoherently. He'd made himself look smaller somehow, hunching his massive frame. The bandages, the genuine wounds. The way his breath rattled in his chest from lying flat with injured ribs, it all painted a picture of a dying man. Cole stepped closer, hand on his pistol. "What's your name, stranger?" Jonas's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Martha," he mumbled, reaching out weakly. "Martha, is that you? I'm sorry about the barn. Didn't mean to let the fire spread." It was brilliant. A fever dream confession about something innocent. Cole relaxed slightly, but then his eyes caught on the bandages. "What happened to him?" "Found him 3 days ago," Eliza said. "Looks like he was attacked by a bear or maybe wolves. The wounds were already infected when he got here. I've been doing what I can, but..." She shrugged, letting them draw their own conclusions. Cole studied Jonas more carefully. The beard was wrong, too short and well-trimmed for a mountain man who'd been living rough. The hands, though calloused, showed recent care. Eliza had been clever, grooming him just enough to change his appearance without making it obvious. "Sheriff Brennan will want to know about any strangers," Cole said finally. "When he's well enough to travel, you bring him to town." "If he lives that long," Eliza replied. One of the other men, younger and clearly nervous, spoke up. "Deputy, we should check the root cellar." Orders were to search thoroughly. Cole nodded, and Eliza's heart nearly stopped. There were things down there that would give them away. William's journal was hidden there, along with extra medical supplies that would suggest she was prepared for more than one patient. "The ladder broke last week," she said quickly. "Haven't been able to get down there. Been meaning to get it fixed, but with the storm..." Cole walked to the cellar door, testing it. The ladder was indeed broken, but recently and deliberately. Jonas had done it an hour ago, thinking ahead. Cole peered into the darkness below, then seemingly decided it wasn't worth the effort. But then they heard it. A soft cry from the bedroom. Not Jonas. Something else. Cole's head snapped up, his hand going to his gun. Eliza's blood went cold as she realized what they were hearing. "What was that?" Cole demanded. Eliza forced herself to look embarrassed rather than terrified. I'm with child, deputy. My husband's child. Sometimes I have pains." "It's nothing." The men suddenly looked uncomfortable. Frontier men might be rough, but a pregnant widow was something sacred. Cole's entire demeanor shifted. I see. Our apologies, Mrs. Hartley. We didn't know. If you do, I've kept to myself since William died. Cole nodded, motioning his men toward the door. But at the threshold, he turned back. That stranger in there. When did you say he arrived? 3 days ago, during the worst of the storm. Funny thing, Cole said, his eyes cold. We found tracks near here. Fresh ones, maybe a day old. Big man, from the stride. You sure you haven't seen anyone else? Eliza met his gaze steadily. Just the one dying in my bed, deputy. Cole studied her for a long moment, then tipped his hat. We'll be back to check on your patient, Mrs. Hartley. For his sake. I hope he recovers enough to answer some questions. The threat was clear. They rode away, but Eliza knew they'd be watching. The weeks that followed were the strangest and most precious of Eliza's life. After Cole's visit, Jonas insisted on earning his keep despite his healing wounds. He chopped wood with careful precision, his massive frame making the work look effortless even though she could see him wince with each swing. He repaired the deliberately broken ladder, reinforced the shutters, and set clever traps around the property that looked like simple winter preparations but would warn them of approaching riders. They fell into a routine that felt dangerously like belonging. Morning coffee shared in comfortable silence while snow fell outside. Afternoons with Jonas teaching her to read tracks in the snow, to identify which animals had passed and when. Evenings by the fire, where she'd change his bandages while he told her about the mountains, about places where eagles nested and where the cleanest streams ran. You're not what I expected, Eliza said one evening, carefully cleaning the healing wounds on his back. The word carved into his chest had finally started to close properly, though it would scar terribly. The stories about Jonas Reed painted you as barely civilized, a wild man who'd forgotten how to live among people. Jonas was quiet for a moment, his muscles tensing under her touch. Maybe that's who I became. Easier to be what they expected than to fight it. He turned slightly, meeting her eyes. I wasn't always alone in those mountains. Had a wife once. Anna. She died of fever our first winter out here, 7 years ago. After that, seemed safer to keep everyone at a distance. Eliza's hand stilled. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. The pain fades, becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you. He reached back, covering her hand with his. You know that better than most. She did know. The grief for William had transformed from a sharp blade to a dull ache. And lately, even that ache had been replaced by something else. Something that sparked whenever Jonas smiled, rare as those smiles were. Something that made her heart race when she watched him working outside, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. One afternoon, she found him at her small desk, struggling with a pencil. His hands, so sure with a rifle or an axe, shook as he tried to form letters on paper. The torture had damaged the nerves in his fingers, making fine movements difficult. What are you doing? She asked softly. He tried to cover the paper, embarrassed, but she'd already seen. Her name, written over and over. Eliza. Some attempts were barely legible, others clear but shaky. The feeling's coming back, he said gruffly. Figured I should practice. Might need to write that statement for the federal marshals someday. But she knew better. She'd seen him flexing his fingers for hours, forcing them to work through the pain. This wasn't about legal statements. This was about being whole again. About being worthy of something more than survival. She pulled up a chair beside him, took his hand in hers, and guided it slowly. Like this. Gentle pressure. Let the pencil do the work. Together they wrote her name, her hand over his, guiding but not controlling. When they finished, the letters were clear and strong. Jonas stared at their joined hands for a long moment, then slowly turned his palm up, interlacing their fingers. Eliza, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I need to tell you something. You're leaving, she said, her heart sinking. You're healed enough now. You want to go after the evidence. No. Well, yes, but that's not. He turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intense. I'm falling in love with you. Have been since you saved my life. Maybe even since you didn't shoot me when you realized who I was. And that terrifies me more than Brennan and all his men combined. The confession hung between them like morning mist. Eliza couldn't breathe. This mountain of a man who'd survived torture and betrayal, who'd lost everything and everyone, was looking at her like she was his whole world. "Jonas," she whispered. "I know I have no right," he continued quickly. "I'm a wanted man with nothing to offer but danger. You deserve better than someone whose very presence puts you at risk. But I needed you to know, before whatever happens next happens." She silenced him the only way she could think of. She kissed him, soft at first, careful of his still healing split lip. But then his arms came around her, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened into something desperate and necessary. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "You impossible man," she said against his lips. "I've been falling for you since you cried in your fever. Since you tried to protect me even while dying. Since you've made this empty cabin feel like home again." That night, she made a decision. Pulling out William's journal again, she added her own notes. Documentation of Jonas's wounds, of what he'd told her about the real killers. If something happened to them, there would be a record, evidence that couldn't be tortured away or silenced. Jonas found her writing and understood immediately. "You're building a legal case." "I'm building insurance," she corrected. "Multiple copies. One stays here, hidden. One goes to my sister in Denver. One to the territorial judge in Helena. If Brennan moves against us, the truth spreads like wildfire." Jonas pulled her against him, his lips pressing against her hair. "Beautiful and brilliant. How did I get so lucky?" "Lucky?" She laughed, but there was sadness in it. "Jonas, I'm pregnant with my dead husband's child. You're wanted for murder. We're living on borrowed time in a cabin surrounded by enemies. This isn't luck." "No," he agreed, turning her to face him. "It's a chance for both of us to have what we thought we'd lost forever. A family, a future, something worth fighting for." As if in response to his words, she felt it. The first flutter of movement in her belly. The baby, making itself known. She grabbed Jonas's hand, placing it where she'd felt the motion. They waited, breathless, and then it came again. Tiny but unmistakable. Life, persisting despite everything. Jonas's eyes widened with wonder. That's our reason to win this fight," Eliza said firmly. "All of ours." The rider appeared at dawn like a ghost from Jonas's past. Eliza saw him first through the frost-covered window, a lone figure on a painted horse, waiting at the edge of their property. Jonas was already reaching for his rifle when he recognized the patient stillness, the way the man sat his horse like he was part of it. "Samuel," Jonas breathed, his whole body relaxing. Samuel Crowfeather. The man who entered their cabin moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd learned to walk silently before he could run. Half Lakota, half French trader, Samuel had been Jonas's closest friend before everything went to hell. His dark eyes took in Jonas's healing wounds and Eliza's protective stance with quiet understanding. "Brother," Samuel said simply, clasping Jonas's forearm in greeting. "I thought you were dead. Brennan's been telling everyone he killed you during the escape." "Nearly did," Jonas admitted. "Would have, if not for Eliza." Samuel's gaze shifted to her, and he inclined his head respectfully. "Then I owe you a debt, Mrs. Hartley. This fool saved my life more times than I can count." But the warmth in his eyes quickly turned to urgency. "We need to talk. Brennan's planning something big. He's put a bounty on you, Jonas. $5,000, dead or alive. Every bounty hunter in 3 territories is heading this way." Eliza's hand found Jonas's, squeezing tight. 5,000 was more money than most men saw in a lifetime. It would turn neighbors into enemies, friends into hunters. "There's more," Samuel continued, his voice grim. "He's been buying up land around your trading post, Eliza. Quiet-like, through intermediaries. This place is the last piece. He needs to control all water access to the valley. He's planning to force you out." "Over my dead body," Jonas growled. "That's exactly his plan," Samuel said. "He's coming in 3 days with papers. Legal documents saying your husband owed debts that need settling. Forged, of course, but the circuit judge won't be through for months. By then, I'll be gone or dead, and he'll have the land," Eliza finished. She stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Just like the Garretts. Just like all the others. Samuel pulled out a worn leather pouch, setting it on the table. I've been gathering my own evidence. Testimonies from families who were forced out. Some of the survivors are hiding with my mother's people on the reservation. They're afraid to come forward alone, but together, we're still dead without the physical proof, Jonas said. The documents I hid, they're the key. Brennan's own orders, his seal, his signature. Without those, it's our word against his. Samuel leaned forward. Then we get them. Tonight. I'll go with you. No, Eliza said, turning from the window. That's what he expects. Jonas running off to retrieve evidence, leaving me vulnerable. We're not splitting up. Jonas stood, moving to her. Eliza, be reasonable. You're with child. The journey to Devil's Canyon is dangerous even in good weather. And staying here alone is safer? You just heard Samuel. Brennan's coming in 3 days. If you're gone, what's to stop him from arriving early? She lifted her chin defiantly. We all go, or no one goes. Samuel looked between them, a knowing smile playing at his lips. She reminds me of Anna, he told Jonas. Same stubborn streak. Same fierce heart. That night, they prepared. Samuel had brought supplies and weapons, including a bow that he gave to Eliza. Quieter than a gun, he explained, teaching her the basics. She was a quick learner, her doctor's training giving her steady hands and an understanding of anatomy that translated well to archery. As they packed, Samuel told them what he'd learned about the night William Hartley died. He made it to the reservation, you know. Your husband came seeking help, already dying from a gunshot wound. My mother tried to save him, but he'd lost too much blood. Before he died, he gave her this. He pulled out a small leather journal, different from the one Eliza had been keeping. She recognized William's handwriting immediately, her throat tightening with emotion. The pages were stained with blood, but readable. Names, dates, amounts. A complete record of Brennan's bribes and threats. William knew they were coming for him. Samuel continued. He told my mother that if anything happened to him, to get this to his wife when it was safe. But Brennan's men have been watching the reservation, watching you. This is the first chance I've had. Eliza read through her husband's final words, tears streaming down her face. At the end, a personal message. My darling Eliza, if you're reading this, I've failed you. But know that I loved you more than life itself. Be happy, my love. Find someone who'll protect you better than I could. Live the life we dreamed of. Jonas stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders, offering silent support. She leaned back against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. He didn't fail, she said softly. He gave us what we need to win. Samuel stood. We leave before dawn. The moon will be dark, giving us cover. But Eliza, are you certain? The ride is hard, and in your condition. She turned to face both men, her eyes blazing with determination. My husband died for this truth. The Garretts died for this land. Jonas nearly died protecting their memory. This child I'm carrying deserves a world where men like Brennan can't just take what they want. Yes, I'm certain. Jonas pulled her close, his lips against her temple. Then we do this together. All of us. Samuel smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. Together it is. But know this, if things go bad, my people will protect you both. The reservation might not be much, but it's beyond Brennan's reach. That night, as they made final preparations, Jonas carved something into a piece of wood. Eliza couldn't see what until he was done. It was a simple message. Here lived Eliza and Jonas Reed. Here they chose to stand. Planning on coming back? She asked. Planning on having a home to come back to, he replied. With you. With our children. All of them. The way he said, our children, including her unborn child without hesitation, made her heart swell. She kissed him then, pouring all her fear and hope and love into it. Tomorrow, they'd ride into danger. But tonight, they were a family preparing to fight for their future. They returned from Devil's Canyon with more than just evidence. They brought back hope, and with it, unlikely allies. The journey had been treacherous, Eliza riding between Jonas and Samuel through frozen passes that threatened to give way beneath their horses' hooves. But when they'd retrieved the hidden cache, they'd found something unexpected. 3 other families were camped nearby, all victims of Brennan's schemes, all waiting for someone brave enough to stand against him. Now, 2 days before Brennan's promised arrival, their small trading post had become a fortress of desperate souls. Martha and James Crawford, whose farm had been burned after they refused to sell. Young Tom Bennett, barely 18, whose father had been murdered for speaking out against Brennan. An old trapper named Moses, who'd lost an eye to Brennan's men but kept the other sharp enough to shoot a pine cone off a tree at 50 yards. Eliza had become their strategist, surprising everyone, including herself. She spread William's maps across her kitchen table, marking defensive positions with the precision of a general. Medical training teaches you to think ahead, she explained when Jonas expressed amazement at her tactical mind. Every surgery has contingencies. Every treatment has potential complications. This is no different. She positioned Martha at the upper window with a rifle, knowing the woman's experience hunting prairie chickens had given her deadly accuracy. Tom would guard the root cellar entrance, now reinforced and stocked with ammunition. Moses took the barn, his position allowing him to cover the approaches. But it was her non-lethal preparations that proved her brilliance. Using her medical supplies, she created smoke bombs that would blind and choke. She had Jonas dig hidden pits covered with thin wood and snow, not deep enough to kill, but sufficient to lame a horse and throw a rider. Samuel contributed his own knowledge, setting up noisemakers that would sound like gunfire from empty positions, creating the illusion of more defenders than they had. "You're not trying to kill them all," Eliza explained to the group. "We're trying to survive long enough for doubt to creep in. Brennan rules through fear, but fear is fragile. Make his men question whether he's worth dying for." The night before Brennan's expected arrival, Jonas found Eliza standing outside, one hand on her growing belly, watching the stars. The aurora borealis painted green fire across the sky, beautiful and ethereal. "Scared?" he asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Terrified," she admitted, "but not of dying. I'm afraid of winning, but losing you in the process. Of this child growing up with stories of a father they never met." Jonas turned her to face him. "That's not going to happen. You can't promise that." "No," he agreed. "But I can promise that I'll fight with everything I have to come back to you. Both of you." He knelt in the snow, pressing his lips to her belly. "You hear that, little one? Your papa's going to be here. Going to teach you to track and hunt and read the weather in the clouds." The baby kicked in response, strong enough that Jonas felt it against his cheek. He looked up at Eliza with wonder. "Strong already. Like the mother. The mother who's about to send the father into battle," Eliza said, her voice breaking. Jonas stood, pulling her close. "We're not going into battle. We're defending our home. There's a difference. Brennan's men are fighting for money. We're fighting for love. That makes us stronger." Samuel approached from the shadows, having overheard. "He's right. I've seen men fight for gold and land and glory. But a man fighting for his family? That's something else entirely. That's sacred." They spent that night in preparation and prayer. Moses told stories of the old days, before men like Brennan poisoned the frontier. Martha sang hymns in a voice that had once filled church halls back east. Tom cleaned his rifle over and over, young hands steady despite his fear. Jonas and Eliza stole moments together between preparations. In the barn, checking ammunition, he pressed her against the wall and kissed her like a drowning man seeking air. "When this is over," he said against her lips, "I want to marry you proper. In a church, with flowers and a dress and whatever else you want. I just want you," she whispered back. "Alive and whole in mine. Already yours," he promised. "Have been since you cut that frozen coat off me." Samuel interrupted with news. His scouts from the reservation had reported movement. Brennan was coming early, hoping to catch them at dawn. But he wasn't bringing a dozen men as expected. He had 20, maybe more. "He knows," Samuel said grimly. Someone talked. "He knows we're ready." Eliza felt fear ice through her veins, but then anger followed, hot and fierce. "Good. Let him know. Let him know that the people he's terrorized are done running. Done hiding. Done being afraid." She gathered everyone in the main room. "Listen to me. Tomorrow, Brennan expects to find victims. Instead, He'll find warriors. Not because we're violent, but because we're righteous. The Garretts deserve justice. William deserves justice. All the families he's destroyed deserve justice. We might be outnumbered, but we're not outmatched. We have something they don't. What's that? Young Tom asked. Each other, Eliza said simply. Brennan's men fight beside each other. We fight for each other. That's the difference between hired guns and family. Jonas watched her with such pride it made her chest tight. This woman who'd saved him, who carried life within her while planning for war, who'd turned victims into fighters with nothing but words and will. As dawn approached, they took their positions. Eliza stood at the main window, William's journal and the recovered evidence locked in a strongbox beside her. If they fell, Samuel had instructions to ride hard for the territorial capital with everything. Jonas checked his rifle one last time, then caught her hand. Whatever happens, know that these weeks with you have been worth everything. You brought me back to life, Eliza. Not just my body, but my soul. Before she could respond, they heard them. Horses. Many horses. The thunder of hooves through snow growing closer. Brennan had come to claim what he thought was his. But he was about to learn that some things couldn't be taken. They had to be earned. And some people couldn't be broken. They could only be pushed until they had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Brennan came with the sunrise, his silhouette dark against the golden light like something out of a nightmare. But it was what happened next that changed everything. As his men spread out to surround the trading post, Jonas's first trap triggered. A horse screamed, its leg caught in one of the hidden pits. The rider went flying, landing hard in the snow. Then Eliza's smoke bombs went off, white clouds billowing across the approach, mixing with the morning mist. Reed, Brennan's voice boomed across the distance. I know you're in there. Come out and face justice like a man. Jonas was about to respond when Eliza grabbed his arm. Her face had gone pale, and she was gripping the windowsill with white knuckles. The baby, she gasped. Something's wrong. The stress, the riding, the fear, it had all been too much. She doubled over as a contraction hit, far too early. Jonas caught her, his face shifting from warrior to terrified father in an instant. Not now, he whispered desperately. Please, not now. But nature didn't care about their battle. Another contraction came, stronger this time. Martha rushed over, her years as a midwife before coming west taking over. She's in labor, Martha confirmed. This baby's coming whether we're ready or not. Outside, Brennan was growing impatient. You've got 1 minute, Reed. Then we burn you out. Samuel took command while Jonas held Eliza. Tom, Moses, covering fire on my signal. Make them think we have more guns than we do. The first wave came hard. Brennan's men charged, expecting little resistance. They met a wall of lead and smoke. Moses proved his reputation, dropping 2 men before they knew where the shots came from. Tom, young and scared but steady, held the cellar entrance against 3 attackers. But inside, another battle was being fought. Eliza was bleeding, too much blood. Martha's face was grim as she worked. The baby's turned wrong, she said quietly to Jonas. I need to turn it, but it's going to hurt her something fierce. Jonas cradled Eliza's head in his lap, his massive hands gentle as bird wings. You're the strongest woman I know, he told her. You can do this. Between contractions, Eliza could hear the battle outside. Gunfire, shouts, the crash of something hitting the barn. She grabbed Jonas's shirt, pulling him close. If something happens to me, you save this baby. Promise me. Nothing's happening to you, he said fiercely. I won't let it. Another wave of attackers came. This time they were smarter, using covering fire to advance. One made it to the porch before Samuel's arrow took him in the shoulder. But they were running low on ammunition, and Brennan knew it. Then, through the chaos, came a sound none of them expected. Horses. Many horses. But not from Brennan's direction. From the north. The territorial marshal, John Stedman, rode in with 8 deputies. Samuel's message had reached him after all, though barely in time. The old lawman took in the scene with experienced eyes, seeing Brennan's men in positions of attack around a fortified trading post. Sheriff Brennan. Stedman called out. What's the meaning of this? Brennan tried to bluster, claiming he was arresting fugitives. But Stedman wasn't buying it. Funny thing, Stedman said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I got some interesting documents yesterday. Evidence of land fraud, murder, and conspiracy, with your signature all over them, Brennan. The tide was turning. Some of Brennan's men started backing away, suddenly realizing they were on the wrong side of federal law. But Brennan himself wasn't done. He'd come too far, destroyed too many lives, to give up now. In the chaos, he broke from his men, charging toward the trading post. He knew Eliza had the evidence. If he could destroy it, kill the witnesses, he might still escape. He burst through the door, gun drawn, to find a scene he hadn't expected. Eliza was on the floor, Jonas beside her, Martha between her legs delivering a baby. The moment of life and death, creation and destruction, all frozen in one impossible instant. Brennan raised his gun, aiming at Jonas. You ruined everything. Jonas moved faster than thought, throwing himself over Eliza and the coming child. The gun fired. Jonas jerked as the bullet took him in the back, but he didn't fall. Instead, he turned, his own gun already in his hand. But it was Eliza who acted. With the last of her strength, she grabbed the rifle beside her and fired. Brennan looked down in shock at the spreading red across his chest. That's for William, she said, her voice steady despite everything. And the Garretts. And everyone else you destroyed. Brennan fell to his knees, then forward. Outside, his men were surrendering to Stedman's deputies. Inside, a different kind of victory was being won. The baby came with Brennan's last breath, as if one life was traded for another. A healthy boy, small but fierce, his cries filling the cabin. Martha placed him on Eliza's chest while Tom ran for medical supplies to treat Jonas's wound. The bullet had missed anything vital, though Jonas would carry another scar. He was conscious, his hand reaching out to touch the baby's head with infinite gentleness. He's perfect, Jonas whispered. Just like his mother. Thomas, Eliza said, her voice exhausted but sure. After William. So he knows where he came from. Marshal Stedman entered, taking in the scene. The dead sheriff, the wounded man who'd been wrongly accused, the woman who'd just given birth in the middle of a gunfight, and the baby who'd arrived in the midst of chaos. Ma'am, he said, removing his hat. I'm going to need statements from everyone. But that can wait. Right now, you all need medical attention. It was over. The evidence would clear Jonas's name. Brennan's men would testify to save themselves. The truth about the murders, the land grabs, all of it would come out. But in that moment, none of that mattered to Jonas and Eliza. They had survived. They had each other. And they had a son whose first breath came with freedom, whose life began with the ending of injustice. The trial took place 3 weeks later in Helena, though it was less a trial and more a revelation. Jonas sat in the witness chair, no longer the hunted mountain man, but a man restored. His wounds had healed enough for him to travel, though Eliza insisted on coming despite having a newborn to care for. She sat in the front row, baby Thomas sleeping against her chest, her presence giving Jonas the strength to relive his nightmare. Marshal Stedman presented the evidence methodically. William's journal, documenting months of investigation. The documents Jonas had hidden, showing Brennan's orders to clear the valley. Sarah Garrett's diary, her final entry written the night before she died, describing Brennan's threats against her children if they didn't sell. But it was the testimony of Brennan's own men that sealed the truth. Marcus Cole, the deputy who'd searched Eliza's cabin, broke down completely. He told the court how Brennan had ordered the Garrett murders, how they'd made it look like savage violence to frame Jonas, how they'd tortured Jonas not for confession but for sport, carving the word into his chest as Brennan watched and laughed. He weren't no killer, Cole said, unable to meet Jonas's eyes. We found him trying to save that baby. Had her in his arms, pressing his own shirt against her wounds. Brennan said it didn't matter what was true, only what people would believe. The courtroom erupted when Cole revealed that William Hartley had been murdered on Brennan's orders, shot in the back while riding to deliver evidence to federal authorities. Eliza's hand found Jonas's, squeezing tight as she finally learned the full truth of her husband's death. Then came the survivors. The families Brennan had driven from their homes testified one by one. Martha Crawford told how their barn was burned with their animals inside when they refused to sell. Tom Bennett described finding his father's body, shot for daring to question Brennan's authority. Each story built upon the last, creating a portrait of systematic terror. Jonas was called to tell his story. He spoke simply, without drama, describing finding the Garretts, trying to save them, and then months of torture designed to break him. When asked to show his scars, he removed his shirt. The courtroom gasped at the map of cruelty written on his skin. The word murderer was still visible, though Eliza's careful treatment had helped it heal cleaner than the others. They wanted me to confess, Jonas said quietly, to say I'd done it. But I couldn't. Not when I'd held that baby girl as she died. Not when I'd seen the real killers' faces. I thought if I held out long enough, someone would look for the truth. And someone did, the prosecutor said, gesturing to Eliza. Tell the court about Mrs. Hartley's role in this. Jonas's voice softened, his eyes finding Eliza in the crowd. She saved more than my life. She gave me reason to keep living. When everyone else saw a monster, she saw a man worth saving. She risked everything to protect me, to find the truth. Without her, Brennan would have won. The judge, a stern man named Harrison who'd seen enough frontier justice to recognize injustice, made his ruling swift. All charges against Jonas were dismissed. Those of Brennan's men who'd participated in the murders would hang. The rest would serve hard labor. The stolen lands would be returned to their rightful owners or their surviving families. But then Judge Harrison did something unexpected. He called Eliza forward. Mrs. Hartley, this court owes you a debt. Your courage and determination exposed a conspiracy that might have continued for years. The federal government has authorized a reward for information leading to Brennan's capture. $5,000. It seems fitting that the bounty Brennan placed on Mr. Reed's head should go to the woman who saved him. Eliza stood, Thomas beginning to fuss in her arms. Jonas immediately reached for the baby, taking him with practiced ease. The sight of the massive mountain man gently soothing the infant brought smiles even in the serious courtroom. Your Honor, Eliza said, I don't want blood money. Give it to the families Brennan destroyed. They need it more than I do. The judge nodded approvingly. The court will note Mrs. Hartley's generosity. However, there's another matter. Mr. Reed, please stand. Jonas handed Thomas back to Eliza and stood, uncertain. The territory of Montana needs good men. Men who understand justice and injustice. Men who've been tested and haven't broken. I'm authorized to offer you a position as a territorial deputy marshal. The pay isn't much, but it comes with land grants and the authority to prevent what happened to you from happening to others. Jonas looked at Eliza, a question in his eyes. She nodded, smiling through tears. I accept, Your Honor, on one condition, which is that my first official act is to marry this woman properly. With you officiating. The courtroom erupted in laughter and applause. Judge Harrison's stern face cracked into a smile. I think that can be arranged, Deputy Reed. Later, outside the courthouse, Samuel Crow Feather waited with the other survivors. He embraced Jonas, then looked at baby Thomas with knowing eyes. He'll grow up free, Samuel said. No shadows of lies hanging over him. That's what you've won here. Not just justice, but truth. Moses, the old trapper, spat tobacco juice and grinned. Never thought I'd see the day when Jonas Reed became a lawman. What's next? Me becoming a preacher. Stranger things have happened, Martha said, holding her husband James's hand. We've all been changed by this. Some of us found justice. Some found courage. And some, she looked meaningfully at Jonas and Eliza, found love. As they prepared to leave Helena, Eliza asked Jonas, do you regret it? Everything that happened. Jonas considered, his hand resting on Thomas's small head as the baby slept in Eliza's arms. The pain, the torture, the loss. I'd take it all again if it led me to you. To this. Even the scars. Especially the scars. They're proof that I survived long enough to find you. To find our family. The truth had been revealed. Justice had been served. But more than that, two broken people had found wholeness in each other. The word carved into Jonas's chest would always be there, but it no longer defined him. Love did. Family did. Truth did. 6 months had passed since the trial, and the Montana morning was perfect for a wedding. Jonas stood at the door of their expanded trading post, now also serving as the regional marshal's office, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. His deputy badge caught the light, still new enough that he sometimes forgot he was wearing it. The limp from Brennan's bullet was barely noticeable now, just a slight favoring of his left side when he was tired. Inside, Eliza was being helped into her wedding dress by Martha and several other women from the valley. It wasn't fancy, just simple white cotton with delicate lace that Martha had tatted herself. But Jonas knew she'd be the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Baby Thomas, now 8 months old, babbled happily in his cradle, watched over by Samuel's wife, Mary, who'd come from the reservation for the ceremony. The trading post had been transformed. Where once there'd been fortifications against attack, now there were wildflowers in mason jars. Where blood had been spilled, children played, including some of the Garrett relatives who'd come to witness justice finally being served. The building itself had grown, with Jonas adding new rooms through the summer. A proper bedroom, a nursery, and a small office where Eliza could continue her medical practice. She'd become the valley's unofficial doctor, using the skills learned from her first husband to heal rather than just witness healing. It seemed fitting somehow that hands which had saved Jonas would go on to save others. The county had even provided medical supplies and a small stipend, recognizing what everyone already knew, that Eliza Reed was essential to the valley's survival. Jonas smiled at the thought. She'd been signing her name as Reed for months now, even before the wedding. "We're already married in every way that matters," she told him one night. "This ceremony is just to make everyone else comfortable with what we already know." Tom Bennett arrived early, wearing his best clothes and a nervous expression. He'd been working at the trading post, learning to read and write under Eliza's patient instruction. Jonas had taken him under his wing too, teaching him tracking and hunting, giving him the father figure Brennan had stolen from him. "You ready, Marshal?" Tom asked, still getting used to calling Jonas by his title. "Been ready since the day she saved me," Jonas replied. Guests began arriving as the morning warmed. Families from across the valley, many who'd suffered under Brennan's reign, came to celebrate not just a wedding but a symbol of renewal. Where once fear had ruled, now community grew. The territorial judge had made special arrangements to attend, bringing news that made Jonas grin. The federal government had approved funding for 2 more deputy positions. Law was finally coming properly to the frontier. Moses hobbled up, dressed in clothes that looked like they'd been stored since the Civil War. "Never thought I'd see Jonas Reed in a suit," he cackled. "What's next?" "Teaching Sunday school. Eliza's already got me reading from the Bible to Thomas at night," Jonas admitted. Amazing what a man will do for love. The ceremony was set for noon, but at 11, a rider appeared on the horizon. Jonas tensed from habit, his hand moving toward where his gun usually sat. But as the rider drew closer, he relaxed. It was a woman, elderly but riding steady, with something familiar in her posture. She dismounted at the post, her eyes scanning the crowd before landing on Jonas. Her face crumpled with emotion. "My God," she whispered, "you look just like your father." Jonas froze. His parents had died when he was young, raised by an uncle who'd passed years ago. He had no family left, or so he'd thought. "I'm Margaret Reed," the woman said. "Your father's sister. I've been searching for you for 2 years, ever since I heard about the troubles. I thought you were dead." She pulled out a daguerreotype, faded but clear. A young couple with a small boy between them. Jonas recognized his own childhood face, but more importantly, he recognized the love in the image. Family he'd forgotten he'd lost. "I have a ranch in California," Margaret continued. "Been hoping to find you, to tell you that you're not alone, that you have family who never stopped looking." Eliza appeared in the doorway, radiant in her simple dress, Thomas on her hip. She took in the scene immediately, understanding with that intuition that had saved Jonas in more ways than one. "You must be family," she said to Margaret, seeing the resemblance. "You're just in time for the wedding." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "A wedding and a great nephew I didn't know about. The Lord works in mysterious ways." The ceremony itself was simple but perfect. Judge Harrison officiated, his usual stern demeanor softening as he spoke about second chances and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Jonas couldn't take his eyes off Eliza, this woman who'd seen him at his absolute worst and chosen to love him anyway. When asked for the rings, Jonas produced two simple bands he'd made himself from gold Samuel had helped him pan from a secret stream. They weren't fancy, but he'd crafted them with his scarred hands, each imperfection a testament to their journey. "Eliza," Jonas said, his voice strong despite the emotion, "you found me frozen and dying, and you brought me back to life. Not just my body, but my spirit. You gave me hope when I had none, love when I deserved none, and a family when I thought I'd lost the right to one. I promised to spend every day earning the faith you showed in me." Eliza's eyes shimmered with tears. "Jonas, you think I saved you, but you saved me too. From loneliness, from giving up, from a life half-lived. You showed me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about always getting back up. You've given me love, protection, and a son who'll grow up knowing his father is the bravest man in Montana." When Judge Harrison pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in Helena. Jonas kissed his bride while Thomas squirmed between them, wanting attention. The baby had Eliza's dark hair, but was already showing Jonas's strong jaw. But more than that, he had Jonas's name and protection, legally adopted and loved as fiercely as any blood son could be. The celebration lasted well into the evening. Stories were shared, songs were sung, and for the first time in years, the valley felt like a community rather than a collection of fearful homesteads. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jonas found himself standing where it had all begun, at the door where Eliza had dragged him in from the snow. She joined him, Thomas sleeping in her arms, her wedding dress now bearing the happy stains of a day well celebrated. Her free hand found his, their rings clicking softly together. "No regrets?" she asked, echoing her question from months before. Jonas looked at their home, filled with friends who'd become family. At his wife, beautiful and strong in his. At the son in her arms and the gentle swell of her belly that suggested Thomas would have a sibling soon. At the badge on his chest that meant he could protect others from suffering what he'd endured. "No regrets," he said, pulling her close. "Only gratitude." In the distance, a wolf howled, but it no longer sounded lonely. It sounded like freedom, like wildness tamed just enough to build a life, but never enough to forget the strength that comes from surviving the storm. Jonas Reed had been a mountain man accused of murder, tortured, and broken. But he'd become a husband, a father, a protector of justice, and a man who knew that sometimes the greatest courage is not in fighting alone, but in choosing to trust another with your heart. The stars came out, brilliant in the clear Montana sky. And beneath them, a family born of tragedy but built on love settled in for their first night of their new beginning. The word carved into Jonas's chest would always be there, but it had been overwritten by a stronger word, one that needed no knife to make it permanent. If you enjoyed this incredible story of redemption and second chances in the unforgiving frontier, remember to click that like button and subscribe to ensure you never miss another powerful tale. Tomorrow's story might be the one that changes how you see the world. What time is it where you're watching? I'd love to know if you're starting your day with this story or ending it on a note of hope. Until tomorrow, remember that sometimes the most broken people create the strongest families.